Oh, okay. So it's been a bit. There's been a lot of chaos and changes, so it's made things particularly problematic in terms of having group, hosting group, and so on. I mean, you can see I got boxes of things next to me. Currently, there's no steps into the camper, so we've been trying to get everything put together, and then we're moving anyways in a few days. So, yeah. Anyway, so given all that, it's been a little difficult to hold group and whatnot. And then the reality is that we've also been on a lot of adventures with God here, in terms of just Him dealing with stuff in our own hearts and so on. So yeah, in a lot of there have been a lot of occasions where He's just been very, very straightforward about, no, I don't want you to have a group this week. No, I don't want you to have a group this week. I want to talk to you. I want to do this. I want to interact with you here, or show you this thing. So that's been a lot of where we've been. However, this week He talked to me very clearly, gave me a clear message to share, and was very adamant about us sharing this message. Hosting group, maybe if it was going to work out, and then absolutely like putting out a video. So here goes. The big thing that God was talking to me about this week was about identity. But more than that, like we talk about identity a lot. There's a lot about who we are. And that's valid to this conversation, to this particular message, but there's some deeper aspects to be borne in mind. See, what God was explicitly talking to me about was about our current society and where we find value. And the thing about it is that at no point in time have we ever really found value in ourselves. See, like a lot of people talk about like Gen Z and millennials and whatnot, and about the projected identities that everyone has. But it goes back further. Like a lot of people way back in the day, I mean, take for example anybody from the baby boomer generation. When you ask them about who they are, they will oftentimes answer you with their job. They will say, oh well, if they're retired, they'll say, oh well, I was an architect, or I was an electrician. As though their job title has some valid credentials for describing who they are as a person. And it's funny because oftentimes, like when I was younger and more aggressive about these kinds of conventions, I would oftentimes frustrate them because I would ask them, it's like, okay, what is that? I didn't ask you what you do, I asked you who you are. And you could watch them get visibly uncomfortable because they answered the question to the best of their abilities. When we were younger, there was a period where people were identifying themselves based off of their sexual preferences. Who are you? Oh, I'm bi. That means what? Oh, I'm omnisexual. Okay, again, that means what? And again, we find ourselves in a place where it's no different now. Like it's a functional problem in that a lot of Gen Z and millennials, for where we dictate identity, where we find it, it comes from places that are entirely outward, nothing inward. When you ask somebody who they are, they'll give you a litany of different things. They might tell you their pronouns, they might tell you their hobbies, they might tell you the things that they're passionate about. but they don't tell you who they are. See, everybody is crafting identity in these days and ages. It's part of why anxiety is such a chronic problem, because you have all these people who they've crafted an identity, they've crafted a person, a version of themselves, an avatar of who they think they want to be, and then they project that forward, whether it's on social media especially. Social media has been a fantastic place for generating fakes. And I say it the way I say it because it's what it is. And a message like this, I'm not going to make friends, but that was kind of the point. God was very clear about this being addressed for what it is. At no point in time has the concept of faking it until you make it ever been something that has been crafted by the Holy Spirit. There's a difference between pushing through something. There's a difference between choosing a side and following it versus pretending you're something you're not and thinking that that's going to change you. It will change you, but not in the ways that you aim to. You're not going to become a happier person because you choose to be happy. You're just going to become more frustrated as you fail to vent the feelings that you struggle with on a routine basis. The anger, the depression, the sadness, whatever it is that makes you feel the opposite of happy on a routine basis, those will exist and those will linger and will embitter you as they exist and sit inside of you. Because you choose to pretend to be a happy-go-lucky person will not make you a happy-go-lucky person outside of your own delusions and maybe the views of some people who are less intuitive. The reality of it is that most people, they try to make themselves. So we gravitate towards ideas of who we think we want to be. We say, oh, that looks popular, or that looks nice. That gets a lot of attention. Social media has been fantastic about that because you're able to look at pictures of things that work. So you see people posing a certain way or doing certain things, and you imitate that because it gets a lot of attention and a lot of reaction, and you say, oh, well, that works. That makes people like you, right? So I need to do that. Even though you might think it's stupid. Even though you might disagree with it entirely. Even though it's just not you. You still do it because that's what you do to be liked, right? And as a result, you push forward in it. And then the frustrating thing about it is when you're met in person by people who know you from that imagery that you've been projecting, you now have to act the part. You have to live up to every bit of the standard that you've been projecting. Otherwise, if they find out that you're not that person, they're going to go online and they're going to share with everybody about how you're a fake and a fraud. And then everyone will gang up on you. It's the most grotesque form of like kangaroo court mob judgment. It's just been moved to an electronic format where we, rather than throwing physical stones at people are hurling verbal barbs. So rather than physical damage and death, it's emotional damage and potentially also death, as has happened many times. The end result's the same. The behavior's the same. It's not a more evolved anything. It's simply just different. And all of this in order to look like something. And all of this in order to garner appreciation, in order to be accepted. At the root of it all, it's about being loved. At the root of it all, what we're all looking for is to be loved. And how we get there becomes incredibly problematic. It's incendiary to attack these particular things, the ways in which, the mechanisms that people use in order to find love and validation. And I understand that. I understand that if somebody attacks something that I seek to feel validated by, I might get defensive and bristle. But at the same time, what I had to learn a long time ago was that sometimes delusions don't go away as easily with kind words as they do with a direct confrontation. And a lot of us don't like confrontation. In this day and age, confrontation's a dirty word. As a result, though, we've come to expect, accept, and live in ways that are incredibly destructive. We allow self-destructive behavior. We allow self-destructive mentalities. We allow incredibly destructive mentalities and behaviors, all for the purpose of avoiding confrontation. We'll let our friends kill themselves because we don't want to address the issue. And I mean that physically, I mean that both literally and figuratively. We're so busy trying to avoid the issue of something potentially being problematic and creating an uncomfortable situation that we'll just stand idly and anxiously by and watch the world burn down around us. Watch the people around us burn themselves down and say nothing because it saves us the issue of having to deal with it and risk losing their friendship, or risk losing their love, or risk being put on blast. That's not love. Love fights for the things that it cares about. Love loves. Passionately, immensely, gratuitously at times. It loves. First Corinthians 13, Paul does a fairly good job of outlining kind of a description of what love is like. And whatever you believe, I want you to listen to the words that he says about it, and I want you to consider them. He says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. To love others is to exist in a state emulating those kinds of things. Think about everything that was just said and weigh it. Does love to you look self-seeking? Does it look proud? Tell me why. Why? Ask yourself these questions. There's a confrontation here to be had because a lot of us believe that love is nothing more than a feeling. Love is an active existence. Love is a spirit. Love is a mindset. It runs deeper than just the feeling, the butterflies and good feelings that come with having somebody close to you. There's more to it than that. Love is passion, it's fire, warmth, and gentleness. It can overlook so much that's wrong in order to see the value of something so buried so deep within something that it would fight for that and exist to fight for that, and just to see it come to the surface for a moment. It's why some of us have those friends who, even though they're just screw-ups, we still love them to death and we still believe in them, because we see it. We see that thing in them that makes them worthy of love. And it doesn't go away just because they mess up again, or because they choose to partner with enemies or things like that. And that's what part of it, where the pain comes from, where heartbreak exists, is because we know that there's more. We know that they're better than that. We know that there's something there, and they are choosing to act in a way that is so polar opposite of who they really are, because we see it, we feel it, we know it. It doesn't go away. Love is patient because it will wait for them to come back around in order to love them again. In some way or another. And this isn't an advocation for bad relationships, understand me very clearly. But it's an advocation for that feeling, for what love looks like. The way that some people will love other people through betrayal. There are a lot of us who might see somebody cheat on somebody else and we think, how could that person let that person back into their life? Well, here's why. Because they're seeing something about that person that you don't. It's always easy from the outside, as people who don't love other people, to not see the things that other people are believing for, and then to judge them. But the reality of life is this, is that we are oftentimes privy to information about things as we see it. Our perspective can be delusional, and it can also be so pure. When other people see another person's worthless, we might see somebody worth fighting for, worth lifting up, worth helping. And then we do it. And sometimes, we get to see them grow to be the person who we saw them as. The person who we knew was under the surface the whole time, who they just needed that one person to come alongside them and say, I actually do believe in you. And I'm going to fight for the person that I believe in, because it's you, and you are worth it. In this way, we get to experience what God exists in all the time with us. I have heard so many people utter the words, if I walked into church, I just burst into flames. I sit there every time I hear it, I'm just like, bro, I'm a former Satanist who literally turned people away from God. There's a whole thing that Jesus says about having a millstone tied around your neck, and I actually fit that description. And I'm a pastor now. I've been working in the church in a pastoral degree for about 10 years. You're going to be fine walking through the doors of the church. Whatever you've done, you're going to be fine. Because the reality of it all is this, is that God, whatever you have done, whoever you have been, there is a place where God would meet you. Where God will fight for you and continue to fight for you. Where he will always see you as his baby boy or his baby girl, and he will love you. And that's not going to go away. That's not going to go away just because you want it to. See, the frustrating thing about God is that he doesn't care if you believe in him or not. He doesn't care if you think he's real or not. He will continue to be there. He'll send random people on the street to ask you to pray for if they can pray for you, and then he'll give them words about you, and you sit and all you can be left with to say logically is, how could they ever have known me? I've never met these people in my life. Are they friends of my friends on Facebook? No? Social media, Twitter, anything? Do they follow people I follow? Did I get stalked? No? Oh, they're from another country entirely? They don't know anything? Okay. And then how? How could they know? How could they see so clearly?
Sometimes God tells things that you haven't told anyone except him.
Yeah. If it wasn't caught on the microphone, Heather just said that sometimes God tells tells prophets things that you have never told anybody, and has them tell you those things. And it's funny how we can easily dismiss it and say, oh, a coincidence. Yeah, sure, it's coincidence. Yeah, that's totally like, if given the choice between believing in an ultimate being who sees and knows everything versus it just being coincidental that somebody randomly knows this incredibly deep-seated fact about you, yeah, one's less delusional.
Some of us have a lot of coincidences that happen.
Yeah, I know. Well, to be fair, it took a lot of coincidences for me to start listening. A lot.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Because at the end of the day, we're all kind of stubborn.
Yeah.
Like, I grew up around science. That was my thing. Evidence was tantamount to belief, to warrant belief. And I now preach the gospel and talk about Jesus and give people words from the Holy Spirit and speak in tongues and do all those things. Yeah, there had to put that into perspective for people watching this. There was probably a lot that I had to see in order to get me to listen and pay attention to this. And God was not, what's the word?
Relent.
He was not stingy about providing circumstances and situations for me to see the reality of just who he is.
Oh, he's very generous.
And how very real he is. So, here's the thing. The thing about love is that God exists in the state of just loving us constantly. And it's because he sees us as his own kids. And understand me very clearly, like, you, as a person, like, no matter what you believe, you deserve to be loved. We're going to clarify that right now and make that very well stated. We're halfway through this message, and it needs to be known and understood that no matter what you believe in, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, you deserve love. Just by the very fact that you are a human being, you deserve love. Maybe you hate people. Maybe you grew up, like, when I was in kind of like the sciences and kind of like fast tracking myself towards a career in the realm of study of zoology and pursuing that as a job. You know, the world around that is one that's very anti-human. There were a lot of people, I myself included, who oftentimes vocalized belief that the best thing for the world would be for the human population to die out completely so that nature could exist. But the funny thing about that is, like, that mindset comes with the idea that we're outside of nature. And that's not real. Every time that some big storm or a hurricane comes through or a tornado rips through some collection of cities, we think, oh my gosh, like, it was an act of God. And it's like, no, it was nature still being there. Somebody gets picked off at a hiking trail by a cougar or a bear. And we're like, oh my gosh, how could that happen? It's like, because nature's still there and we're still part of it. An ant colony, if an ant lives inside of an ant colony, it's not worried about a bunch of predators running around, but the moment it ventures outside that colony, it's in nature once more. It never left nature, though. That's the thing. And I think that's important for us to weigh and to consider. Like, whatever we believe in, like, whether you believe in God or not, it's important for us to use nature as the control in our understanding of the way things are. And I don't mean like all of nature in description of human beings. I mean human beings and human nature and physicality. And this is important for Christians, and this is actually something that God was expressly giving to me to say. So this isn't just a my personal thoughts. Because in the end, like, whether you believe in God or not, He created nature. Whether you're a believer or not, nature was there. Nature existed, and it was its own thing. And as such, we grew up as part of nature. As a result, there are standards there. There are baselines there for us to look at in order to gauge ourselves and where we're at. If we're acting in a way that is harmful to us, emotionally or physically, or is changing things about our nature, then it's not that we should be looking at nature and how to change nature. We should be looking at ourselves and wondering why we feel the need to change what is natural about us. Do you understand? Like, that should be the mentality, not I feel differently than I am. It should be, why do I feel differently than I am? Why do I feel that way? What has caused me to feel so different that I can't even identify with what is natural? A snake may feel like it has legs, but it doesn't mean it's going to run any faster just because it pretends to. It's still going to slither on its belly. It's still going to be a snake. And even if it finds a way to get, I believe there was a experiment recently where they attached legs to a snake and they gave it like a robotic mech suit, and it was able to control. And it was kind of funny, but at the same time, it didn't change the fact that it's still a snake. It's just in a box now. We're not really in control. Like, we're not really in control of nature. We have aspects of it that we've accomplished something with, but there's always more. And the thing about it is that as a result, like, that should be our gauge, whether we're followers of God or not. But the other thing about it, and just for the followers of God who would jump up and be like, wow, but nature's horrifying, there's all kinds of monstrosity and so on. It's like, yeah, no, not the one that God created. Remember the Garden of Eden? We're going to talk about the Garden of Eden for a moment, because that's a big deal. God's creation of nature was very, very harmonious. Everyone was vegan and naked, and everyone was happy about it. The animals all ate plants. The people all ate plants. And they had no shame. Imagine a world, church, with no shame. Can you? Can you? Because love and shame don't go hand in hand. Like, that's not a thing. If your version of loving somebody is shaming them to the deepest parts of their soul, then we need to have a talk, man. Like, we need to have a very very clear talk. But the thing about it was that when we boil it all down, God created us in his own image. And this is where it's important to understand that we all deserve love just for being human beings. Okay? See, back to that point about the whole nature thing and being outside of nature, we have the ability to be just as much a boon to the world as we have the ability to be destructive. Okay? Our existence is not an automatic problem. It's a problem because we make it a problem. We choose. It doesn't have to be that way. I remember, like, on the one hand, we've got countries out on the some of the biggest polluters in the world come from East Asia, where they look at the ocean as just a dumping ground. So there's an entire like an island of plastic just swirling around in this portion of the Pacific, and people kept looking at it and saying, "Oh my gosh, look at that! That's horrible. That needs to be cleaned up," and nobody did it. Everyone looked at it. Every country was like, "Oh, look at that," and we were like, and everyone's like, "Okay, any of you guys want to step up and do it?" No, every country was like, "Well, technically, that all came from them. Well, I don't see why we should invest our resources into it." That's a bad thing. However, this college student, this random kid, said, "Yeah, you know what? I'm just gonna build a business, literally with the intent of going out and cleaning that up," and he did. And he drove out there in a boat by himself and started pulling plastic into his boat and removing it. We have the capacity to be just as good for the world as bad for the world. That doesn't go away just because a lot of people make one choice. It's always there. Just as love is passionate and is an active thing, that's so much of life for us. We're always capable of moving in that direction. The only thing stopping us half the time is us, or money. There could be some things here or there, sometimes circumstances hard, but oftentimes it's just us. I don't want to do this because I'm anxious. I don't want to do this because I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to do this because... Okay, but understand you're making a decision in response to something that's affecting, in response to fear or something like that. It's an emotional thing that you're not overcoming because that is the problem. And if it's so great that you have to sit down with it, that you can't just push through it, then it's something that you need to sit with and you need to spend time with, because it needs to be addressed, it needs to be overcome, it needs to be fixed, because it will continue to harm you. You'll always feel helpless until it's addressed. And the thing about it is, with God we have the capacity to have it all addressed, because he loves us and he cares about us and he's always pushing. All those things that Paul said about love, God exemplifies those things. Whatever you believe about him, it's true that he does those things. He exemplifies those things. Even if you dig all the way back into the Old Testament, where God describes himself to Moses, he describes parts of what Paul says. He would aim to heal those things, but you have to want him to. And a lot of us, in truth, when we're going to be honest about it, a lot of us are more comfortable not addressing those things, because it's easier to exist with that than to have it be overcome. And it's not easier, but for anxiety's sake, it's easier, because the idea of not having that chain holding you in place is actually more terrifying because it opens up new possibilities that are unknown. And when you struggle with anxiety, that's so much worse sometimes. The unknown can be worse than anything else, even if the unknown is only good or only has the capacity to be good. You could have a guaranteed pass to a life of happiness, and you still might choose to stay right where you are, because what if? What if something goes wrong? Is it worth the risk? And even though you might say, the answer is yes, I guarantee it. There will be hard times no matter what you believe or what you do, but the answer will always be yes. It's better to go and suffer those hard times as well as reap the rewards of the great times than it is to sit where you are and feel helpless. In the book of Genesis, chapter 2, starting in verse 7, it describes how God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Whatever you believe, you deserve love simply for being human. Whether you don't believe in God, and you believe that we are the product of a random explosion and millions of years of stardust collecting to form a planet, and then us forming from the gradual evolution from a primordial soup. That's a lot. That's a lot that's happened. And that makes you worth something. And even more so if you believe in God. You literally were formed from dust and breathed life into by God Himself. And this is why it's so important for us to remember who we are. And that we deserve love, because God, as I was saying earlier, when we see that thing about people and we love them and we can't shake it, that's the same way that God sees us, because He looks at us and He sees His own breath in our lungs. He sees His own image in our faces, in our bodies. He sees Himself in us and knows that we are capable of so much good. We are capable of so much love and so much more than that. A lot of people will look at the bad side of humanity and say, well, look at all these disgusting things that people have done. It's like, well, look at all the fantastic and beautiful things that they've done. Whether you want to talk about iambic pentameter, I mean, the same beings that created the nuclear bomb created the most wonderful works of art. That didn't happen on accident. Somebody sat down, got inspiration, said, I'm going to build this thing. And then they did it. And then there it is, a monument to somebody's inspiration, to somebody's passion. And it exists for years later just to inspire other people and make them say, you know what, I want to do something great too. And then they do it. The most beautiful songs, the most incredible acts of goodness and kindness, they're all there. And when God looks at us, He sees that part of Himself that loves so deeply that we can exemplify that too, in order to continue to build and create this net of love that's able to grow the people around us and to continue to bring everybody forward. And that's who we are. That's who we are. Every one of us is capable of love. Everyone is capable of caring about the people around us and acting on it and living in it. And that's part of who we are. When we talk about identity, loving and being loved is tantamount to being a person. You can walk around and you can act like a decorator crab who grabs little pieces of the world around them, attaches them to themselves, and says, I'm a thing now. I exist. I'm in the world. And it will never be real. You'll still be a crab. What matters most is being able to know you're a crab and love yourself for it. And know that you don't need to grab parts of the world to make yourself. See, it's a weird analogy, but I'll explain. The crab in nature uses that camouflage by plucking parts of the world off of the world, putting it on itself, and then it uses that to camouflage itself so it can feel safe. We exist in a world where the only predators are us. And the truth is, we don't really need to be afraid of those predators, not actually. But we still do the same thing, where we try to look like the world around us in order to feel safe. We don't have to do that. We can not do that. We can exist in such a way. We can live with God. And we can be safe with God. We can live as unapologetically being ourselves. And we can be okay doing that. Because who you are, because you as a person, you mean something. You're worthy of love. And the funny thing about that is that when we receive that love, and this is why it's so important, Christians, to know that God loves you and to accept that, because that love is transformative. Knowing that there's somebody out there who views you the same way that Paul describes, that is essential to our existence, because once we know that we're loved that way, we can be free. We no longer have to feel like we need to attain that love. Achievement goes out the window. Because you know what? You don't need to prove it. There's nothing to prove when you have the love that you secretly have been wanting this whole time. The love and validation, the accomplishment, none of it matters. None of it matters. And even when there are things that crop up and you still say, you know what, I kind of want that. I want that little feather in my hat. When you don't get it, you can be okay. Because you have the biggest feathers, and because you have the hat in the first place. And that's all that you really need. This is where we find ourselves. It's in love. It's in the state of being loved. Who you find outside of that will always be a mystery, and it will always be a mess. Because it's anything and everything that you can grab a hold of in order to try to make yourself feel like you're worth love. To bring it back to the social media thing, I want you to think about how dangerous it feels to go against the grain that you have projected for yourself. If you are somebody who has painted a particular picture of yourself for other people to look at, and now you have to maintain that. What do you do when it turns out that none of that's true? You find out that no one loves you anymore. The love goes out the window. They stop loving you, and suddenly that's just gone. It's horrifying. Because it was never real, though. People loved you and appreciated you because you matched what they what validated them, not because of who you are. It was always about them. Their love, as it were, their admiration, as it were, was self-seeking. It wasn't about you. It was about them. And you were there to validate and entertain them. That's all that happens. It's very often that is the fan base, as it were, that a person or people might have. And to be blunt, it's really not worth the anxiety and the effort to keep. When you have the opportunity to have something, when you have the opportunity to hold something, to be a part of something where you are loved purely for you, and that love isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to stay right there with its hand on your shoulder and a piece of you of it in your heart. Because the Holy Spirit is a part of us. It's not a thing that we admire, that comes on occasion. A couple little verses to leave off with. The first one is Ephesians 4. If ever I could find Ephesians. There it is. Starting in verse 11. So Christ gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love, as each part does its work. So I tell you this, and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality so as to indulge in every kind of impurity, and they are full of greed. That, however, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught, with regard to your former way of life, to put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. In essence, all that to say, God created the people who he's put in the church, created each of us to be members of this church, And it's only in attaining the fullness of that, the understanding of who we are, and submitting ourselves to God, giving up who we used to be in order to receive who we are. And it's only in that we find comfort and salience as we rest in the idea that we are who we are, and we're not blown around anymore. And it's in that we build up everything. But the old person has to go so that we can continue to be who we are and in the truth exist in comfort. But more than that, in the straight reality of being known for ourselves. The other verse is John 15. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me, and my word remains in you, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other. It's Jesus talking to the disciples and before his crucifixion. He talks about the vine and the branches and the connection between us and him, and the need for that to be maintained in order for us to be fruitful in this world. Because through him we would bear good fruit, and fruit in this context is not achievement, but it's spiritual, honest changes in the heart and person fruit. To be okay, to be loved, to love, to be patient, to be gentle, to be kind, to be merciful, to administer, to be able to minister to those who need it, and minister, counsel, love, care for. And while you can do all those things on your own, sure, to some extent, there's a deeper extent to which God can take us and hold us there, where we're able to persevere in that love far beyond what we can do on our own, because we're sharing in it at that point. God's love transcends all of ours. As much as we might try to pretend otherwise, it does. And that's for us to pick up if we see fit. At the end of the day, all of this to say, we're all worthy of love. And God offers us all the love that we could ever, all the love that we need to be sustained on. And that's a great foundation for us to build off of, just being loved. And when I say build off of, I'm talking about who we are. See, we shouldn't be running around trying to find who we are. We should be building who we are off of the idea that we're loved by God, that we're worthy of love, and that we are loved. We weren't built to exist in a state of loneliness, trying to find value in the world around us, trying to convince the world around us that we're worth being loved. That's never been part of nature. That's never been part of our nature. And if you wish to dispute that, there's a lot of psychological studies that indicate the reality that love is necessary for development of any individual human being. And the lack of love is detrimental. We are made for love. We're made to be loved. That is where we find ourselves and who we truly are. Not our job title, not our sexual identity, not our gender, not our not our hobbies, not our passions, who we really are. And that's all I got.